The Native Mounted Police were a government organisation that operated across 19th century Queensland. Their actions enabled the spread of European settlement across the state, but had devastating consequences for Indigenous peoples. The history of the Native Mounted Police is a story spanning half a century involving more than 1,200 men stationed at over 170 different locations, from the east coast to the western border with the Northern Territory, and from the southern border region with New South Wales to the tip of Cape York Peninsula. Each police camp contained white officers in charge of detachments of Indigenous troopers, and many of these men were accompanied by their wives and children. Some men joined the force for the opportunities it provided, others because they had few, if any, choices. This database makes available for the first time the results of a 4-year archaeological project to document this complex story. It's the only publicly available historical and archaeological dataset on the Native Mounted Police. Its purpose is to give researchers, educators, students and members of the general public, many of whom will have personal connections to the force, online access to an important part of Queensland's history. To help organise the tens of thousands of entries, the database is split into 4 main categories. These are people, camps, events, and archaeological sites and objects. As you become more familiar with the database, you'll be able to delve deeper into subcategories within these 4 main areas. Let's look at each of these a little more closely. In the first section, People, you'll find information on over 400 officers, 800 troopers, and 1,800 other people who had some form of association with the police or with conflict on the frontier. For the Native Mounted Police staff, we've gathered together as much information as we can about each person, including biographical information, where they were posted, and the events they may have been involved in. Importantly, all of the information in the database, both here and in the other sections, is cross-referenced to allow you to track back to the original sources and to see clearly the web of connections. The second section, Camps, contains information on more than 170 police camps. Some lasted for months, others for several years, and a few camps lasted for a decade or more. As well as describing the well-known massacres on the frontier, the third section of the database, Events, will give you an insight into some of the lesser-known episodes of conflict. So far, we've mapped over 1,850 conflict events under 4 headings: attacks on stock or property, attacks on Europeans or other non-Indigenous settlers, attacks on Aboriginal people, and attacks on Native Mounted Police detachments. The final database section, Archaeology, is the heart of the project, where you can learn about the Native Mounted Police through the different materials and artefacts they left behind. Some of these are everyday objects like ceramic plates and cups, glass bottles or tobacco pipes, while others are more evocative objects like fragments of weapons or ammunition or the buttons from the troopers' uniforms. To help educators and students make the most of the enormous amount of information, we've also developed worksheets around some key topics and issues. These worksheets draw together primary and secondary sources, including, in some instances, interviews that allow you to hear directly from traditional owners themselves. We invite you to visit frontierconflict.org and explore this valuable resource that might just challenge what you thought you knew about Australia's history.